Hey guys, and welcome to week 8, the last week of this course. I can't believe it. I feel like it's flown by, which is crazy. Yeah, so both I want to wrap up, but also this last week is also really cool. So I want to do a little bit of both. So this entire course is about voice, yes, but really what it's all about is gaining a sense of control in your writing and being able to have a sense of intentionality with your writing. So all of voice is gaining control over how you're depicting your characters so that it isn't just something that you sit down and it just happens the way it happens and you don't have any control over it. And it's like the horse and buggy just kind of go and go and go and get away from you. But no, now hopefully through some of these tools, as you practice them and get better and better at it, you have control over the way that you are manipulating the character on the page so that the person you present and their personality can come off the way that you intend. So just like any other creative discipline, whether it's music or, painting or art or anything, you practice and you learn tools and you do more of that so that the creative endeavor, you have intention and that changes the art that you're putting out there. So that's what all of this has been about, has been to give you as an artist more control over what you're putting out there. And so control over Zoom. So yes, I've been trying to get you as close in as possible so that you know how to get as close as possible, which is usually a problem with voice because we might naturally go more distant, or at least that's often a problem. So I want to get you to know how to get as close so then you can zoom out and in and out, So you don't need to always be as close, but you need to know how to zoom in for those close-up moments during moments of action or emotional intensity, or anytime like in a cinema or a movie, they would zoom in for a close-up. They're trying to capture the actor's emotions, so they'll go in so close, almost up to their eyes, because in cinema, that's all they have to get at the interior thoughts is the shift of the eyes or whatever. But we can go in close to their internal thoughts, like that's where the thought bubbles between dialogue and that kind of thing. So that's what that is. You don't always have to be zoomed in as close as possible, but you need to know how to. So yes, okay. And so this lesson is, now that you know how to go in as close as possible, and now that we've stripped out all of the overriding and purple prose and all the extra junk, now that you've gotten down to kind of the baseline and are as close as possible, now you can zoom out some and you can add back in lyricism. And so this chapter talks about how you do that. So it talks about lyricism, style, and tone. Also in the context of literary fiction and upmarket fiction, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about all of that. So lyricism, what is lyricism? I've mentioned that word, and I think we generally have a sense of what it is, but I do kind of define it. So it means writing in an artistically expressive or imaginative way. So this is where we can kind of let our writerly chops out a little bit. But remember, lyricism, no matter if it's going to be a poetic phrase or something, it still always has to come through your point of view character's lens. And I'll give examples of this, like Room. It came through the lens of 5-year-old Jack. And I'll give a short excerpt. And this lesson is full of examples, so you can see what I'm meaning and how writers create lyricism through their point of view characters. So Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, you'll see it over and over, how they're doing this through their characters' lenses. And so it feels very natural, but But because humans are such great and complex characters, you can have these amazingly poignant insights, no matter if your character's 5 or 50 or, a 15-year-old or, military guy, harsh military guy. It can come, basically the big concept is that complex, emotionally heartrending thoughts and deep lyrical moments can come through the simplest of language. And it doesn't have to be this, poetic language in the way that we would think of poetic language. It can be really simple words and not the kind that drifts into purple prose. Okay, then I talk about authorial style as brand. And what I mean like authorial style, this might be the traditional kind of thing like voice, like we talked about voice is misunderstood, like find your authorial voice, as opposed to character voice, which is what we've been talking about through the whole class. But this is the kind that people will talk about, like an authorial voice or an authorial style. And this is kind of what people talk about when authors kind of have a brand where their voice is kind of the same over a bunch of novels. And that's what in the business people will talk about as an author's brand, where whenever you go to a particular type of novel, like a Nora Roberts novel, you kind of know that you're going to get a similar experience because that's their brand, or John Green novels for in the young adult sphere. You kind of know that you're going to get awkward youth, a larger-than-life character, young adult characters who sound a little bit more adult than they should, and like really deep thoughts that are very lyrical. So like a John Hughes movie, that's a brand. You say, oh, this is like a John Hughes movie. So it's something where readers know what they're going to get, or an audience knows what they're going to get. And that's referred to as a brand, which publishers are all about. They're like, that's great. We want to get a brand. And authors are about too, because that means if a reader always knows what they're going to get, then they're more likely to keep picking up your novels. But it can be a bad thing if all of your characters' voices start to sound the same. Then the question is, are you really digging in to each character to make them have a distinct voice, as in, are you truly becoming a different person for each different character to find their own individual voice, like we've been talking about all class, which is honestly something really hard to do, and I've only found a few authors who genuinely their books feel authentically different every book I read. So that's not really something to worry about. It's just something to think about and is part of this discussion. So and genuinely, what we should be trying to do with everything we write is to go for the character-based voice. And look, as you create a body of work, then you can go back and look and you can start to see your style. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. You go back and you start to see your style, you start to see your writing tics. And then you can start addressing them. Again, it's this whole writing as a process, as a learning process, as a discovery process. There's a writer who wrote Writing Down the Bones, Natalie Goldberg, who talks about writing as a way to discover your own mind. And that ties into this. So as you begin writing and creating a body of work, and I know a lot of you are just beginning, but that's cool. This is, even beginning writers you start to discover your own mind in the way that you start writing, and that's a cool part of it. So anyway, as you write, you begin to discover your own mind, you begin to discover your own quirks, your tics, and then you can also incorporate what you're learning about style, what you're learning about voice. So then you begin to address those things in either editing or in your new writing. Anyway, it's a process of discovery. It's a process of thinking about whether you are more concerned with brand, whether you're more concerned with having characters who are super different from each other because you're more concerned with characters based novels and character driven novels that are their own voices. And then I talk about literary fiction and upmarket fiction. Literary fiction is, so I go ahead and define these. Literary fiction is considered kind of, for a lack of a better word, like highbrow fiction, but it's often less plot driven and more character driven, and it can be experimental in its use of language, plot, or other classic literary conventions. It's trying to push the envelope, so it was always on the cusp of modern and postmodern and trying to push the envelope on cultural themes. And it's also trying to comment on social or political life or the human condition. So that's what literary fiction is. And so sometimes people find it a little more dry or hard to get through since it isn't always as interested in plot. But then there's upmarket fiction, and what upmarket fiction is it's that thing that's between. So here's literary and here's mainstream fiction, kind of your supermarket buy or the thing you upread on your e-reader for a nice, escapist read. But in between is upmarket fiction. And that's the kind that, so it's between literary and mainstream, and it has a more literary bent, but it does have plot. And yeah, the characters are more voice-driven and relatable, but it has that literary bent where it's interested in some of the same things, the human condition, questions of politics or social commentary, but it's more accessible. And so examples of upmarket fiction are like The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, The Kite Runner, Little Bee, Room by Emma Donoghue, Fault in Our Stars, The Time Traveler's Wife. Just a lot of those kind of book club books are upmarket fiction, and I think you can get the feel. I list a ton more in the thing if you're really wondering what it is. And so a lot of these are more interested in lyricism or that kind of thing that I'm talking about in this lesson, where you can take that space and they might be zoomed out a little bit more narrative distance wise, but then they can also go in close and they are voice driven. So this is where you can learn to put back in lyricism, play with narrative systems, and zoom in and out if you want to learn how to balance some of these elements. These are the kind of things you might want to read and go to. So and just again, it's all about, like, that's what I've tried to provide through the reading examples all course long, is examples of seeing people do this in the real world. So you get a feel for how this is happening in real time in the real publishing sphere. And just so that we can gain control and we can learn how to do this in our own fiction and get more comfortable, So it's a creative endeavor, but we want to have control over what we're doing, just like the brush strokes on a painting, or a virtuoso who even out of a single note is getting color and vibrato and all of that out of a single note. That's what we're trying to do with the voice of our characters. We want to have that control over it so that we know what we're putting on the page. We know how we're trying to, we know what what we are aiming for our audience to feel, even though they're going to have their own experience of the novel. We want to know what we're kind of aiming for. So that's what we're hoping to get out of this class, or at least some of the tools I'm trying to equip you with. I really look forward to reading some of your writing this week. So that is due this Saturday. I'm going to keep the course open for 2 weeks after the final date, although I'll probably respond to you with email on your final pieces. If you have any questions about how to put them in that Dropbox, it's in the initial introductory box is where the private critique Dropbox is. If you have any questions, just email me. And I look forward to our last chat this Wednesday. All right, guys, have a great week.